The air raid sirens wailed across New Geneva as Marcus Chun clutched his 3-month-old daughter closer to his chest. The baby's soft breathing was the only sound that mattered in the chaos erupting around the human colony. Through the reinforced windows of the emergency shelter, he could see the crimson streaks of plasma fire lighting up the night sky like deadly fireworks. "All civilians remain in designated safe zones," the automated voice echoed through the corridors. "Zephyrian attack fleet detected. Repeat, this is not a drill." Marcus adjusted little Sarah's blanket, making sure her tiny face was protected from the acrid smoke beginning to seep through the ventilation systems. The other colonists huddled together in family groups, their faces painted with fear and resignation. They had all heard the stories from other human worlds. The Zephyrians didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They came like a plague of locusts, consuming everything in their path before moving on to the next target. The lights flickered as another explosion rocked the settlement. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Sarah stirred in her father's arms but didn't wake. Marcus had been giving her mild sedatives since the first warning signals came through 3 hours ago. He knew what was coming, even if the others still held on to false hope. "Dad, what's happening out there?" asked Jennifer Walsh, a teenage girl whose parents had been caught outside when the attack began. She had been placed in Marcus's care when the emergency protocols activated, pairing unaccompanied minors with available adults. "The Zephyrians are testing our defenses," Marcus replied quietly, not wanting to spread panic. "Our ships will hold them off." But he knew better. Marcus had served in the Terran Defense Force before Sarah was born. He had seen the tactical reports, knew the numbers. New Geneva had exactly 12 defensive satellites and 4 patrol ships. Intelligence suggested the Zephyrian war fleet approaching their system contained over 200 vessels, each one capable of glassing an entire continent. The colony's defense coordinator, Captain Rivera, burst into the shelter with 3 of his security team. His uniform was torn and scorched, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "We need to evacuate now," he announced to the room. "The outer perimeter has been breached. We have maybe 20 minutes before they reach the settlement." Panic erupted among the civilians. Parents grabbed their children, elderly residents struggled to their feet, and everyone began talking at once. Marcus remained seated, calculating their options. The evacuation ships could hold maybe half the colony's population. The rest would have to remain behind and hope for mercy that would never come. How many ships? Marcus called out to Rivera, 3 transport vessels. We can take the essential personnel and maybe 200 civilians. There are over 400 people in this settlement." Rivera's expression grew grim. "I know." Marcus looked down at Sarah's sleeping face. Such innocence in a universe that seemed designed to destroy anything pure and good. The Zephyrians had been systematically eliminating human colonies for the past 2 years, claiming humans were a parasitic species that threatened galactic stability. The Galactic Council had issued formal protests but took no action. Earth was too far away to provide meaningful support. Each colony was on its own. "I'm staying," Marcus announced, standing up with Sarah still in his arms. "Don't be ridiculous," Rivera snapped. "You have a child to think about?" "I am thinking about her," Marcus replied calmly. "And I'm thinking about everyone else too." Jennifer tugged at his sleeve. "What do you mean you're staying? You said the ships would protect us." Marcus knelt down to meet her eyes. "Sometimes, Jennifer, the best protection comes from unexpected places. You need to get on one of those ships with the others." "But what about you and the baby?" "We'll be fine." Marcus hoped his voice sounded more confident than he felt. Rivera was already organizing the evacuation. Families were being separated, children crying as they were handed to strangers who might have room on the transports. The mathematics of survival were brutal and unforgiving. Marcus helped several elderly residents toward the exit, making sure they would be prioritized for evacuation. "Chun, don't be a hero," Rivera said as he passed by with a group of terrified colonists. "That baby needs her father." "Her father is exactly what she's going to get," Marcus replied, as the evacuation ships lifted off into the burning sky. Marcus found himself alone in the shelter with perhaps 50 other people who had either chosen to stay or been left behind. They were the old, the injured, the stubborn, and the hopeless. They watched through the windows as their friends and families disappeared into the night. Possibly forever, the Zephyrian ships began their final approach. These weren't the massive dreadnoughts Marcus had expected, but smaller raider craft designed for ground assault. They moved with predatory grace like metallic dragons breathing plasma fire. One landed just outside the settlement's main gate, its hull gleaming with an oily, iridescent sheen that seemed to shift colors in the firelight. The first Zephyrian emerged from the ship, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. They were nothing like the intelligence reports had described. Instead of the reptilian humanoids he had expected, the creature standing in the settlement's main square looked like something from ancient mythology. She was tall and elegant, with skin that seemed to be made of living flame. Her eyes burned with an inner light that was both beautiful and terrifying. More Zephyrians followed their leader, each one radiating the same otherworldly presence. They moved through the settlement like avenging angels, their very presence causing the air to shimmer with heat. Marcus could hear the sounds of buildings being systematically destroyed, but there were no screams, no sounds of violence against people. They were searching for something. Sarah began to wake up, making the soft cooing sounds that had become the soundtrack of Marcus's life over the past few months. He rocked her gently, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure he believed. Outside, the footsteps of the Zephyrian search party grew closer to the shelter. "She's coming," whispered Mrs. Chun, an elderly woman who had refused evacuation. "The Fire Lady is coming." Through the reinforced glass, Marcus could see her approaching. The Zephyrian leader moved with purpose, her fiery form casting dancing shadows on the walls of nearby buildings. She stopped directly outside the shelter and turned toward the window. Their eyes met across the distance, and Marcus felt something unexpected pass between them, recognition. The Zephyrian leader stood motionless outside the shelter for what felt like an eternity. Marcus could see her more clearly now through the reinforced glass, and the sight took his breath away. Her skin wasn't actually made of fire, but rather seemed to contain it like molten gold flowing beneath transparent crystal. When she moved, trails of luminescent energy followed her movements, creating patterns in the air that faded slowly like afterimages of beauty. Sarah gurgled softly in his arms, completely unaware of the danger surrounding them. The baby's innocent sounds seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence of the shelter. The other survivors huddled together in the far corners, trying to make themselves invisible. But Marcus remained standing near the window, meeting the alien's burning gaze with steady determination. The Zephyrian tilted her head, studying him with an expression that seemed almost curious. Then she raised one hand and pressed it against the glass. Where her palm touched, the reinforced material began to glow with soft orange light. The glass didn't melt or break, but somehow became permeable. Her voice reached them without any visible communication device, resonating inside their minds rather than their ears. "Human male, you carry offspring." The words carried strange harmonics, like multiple voices speaking in perfect synchronization. Marcus felt the mental touch like warm honey flowing through his thoughts. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was deeply alien and utterly intimate. He could sense vast intelligence behind those burning eyes, along with something else he couldn't quite identify. "Yes," Marcus replied aloud, not knowing if she could hear him. "Her name is Sarah. Sarah." The Zephyrian repeated the name, and somehow the alien pronunciation made it sound like music. "You did not flee with the others. Someone needed to stay. To die with honor?" Marcus considered the question carefully. The other survivors were watching this exchange with a mixture of terror and fascination. Mrs. Chun had tears streaming down her weathered face, while the few remaining adults clutched each other for comfort. Outside, the sounds of systematic destruction continued as other Zephyrians catalogued and dismantled the human settlement. "To live with purpose," Marcus finally answered. "And if that means dying, then yes, with honor." The Zephyrian's hand moved across the glass surface, tracing complex patterns that left glowing trails behind. "Your species confuses us, human male. You build in places you cannot defend. You create what you cannot preserve. You love what you cannot protect. Maybe that's what makes it worth doing, explain. Marcus looked down at Sarah's peaceful face, then back at the alien warrior studying them. We build because building is better than destroying. We create because creation brings meaning. We love because love makes us more than just survival machines. Your colony will be processed. Your structures will be repurposed. Your technology will be integrated. This is the natural order. And the people? The Zephyrian paused, her burning eyes flickering with something that might have been uncertainty. People are ... complicated. Marcus could feel the mental connection growing stronger, as if the alien was opening more channels of communication. Through that link, he began to sense emotions that seemed strangely familiar despite their alien source. There was purpose, yes, and duty, but underneath those driving forces was something that felt almost like loneliness? What's your name? Marcus asked. I am Kirith, Flamebearer of the Seventh Fleet, daughter of the Solar Winds. That's a beautiful name. Beauty is irrelevant to function, is it? Kirith's hand stilled against the glass. You question much for one who faces termination. I question much because I face termination. What's the point of staying quiet now? Sarah chose that moment to wake up fully, opening her bright blue eyes and looking directly at the window where Kirith stood. The baby's gaze seemed to focus on the Zephyrian's face with the kind of absolute attention that infants sometimes display. Sarah made a happy cooing sound and reached one tiny hand toward the glowing figure beyond the glass. The effect on Kirith was immediate and profound. Her entire body went rigid, the flames beneath her skin pulsing with new intensity. Through their mental link, Marcus felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked him off his feet. Surprise, wonder, and something that felt like recognition crashed through the alien's consciousness. The small one sees me, Kirith whispered, her mental voice filled with awe. Of course she sees you. You're pretty hard to miss. No, she sees me. Not the flames, not the weapon, not the destroyer. She sees me. Marcus began to understand. How long has it been since someone looked at you without fear? Kirith's silence stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if he had overstepped some boundary. When she finally responded, her mental voice was barely a whisper. I do not remember. The admission hung between them like a bridge spanning impossible distances. Marcus could sense other Zephyrians approaching through the settlement, their own fiery forms visible through the smoke and destruction. Time was running out for this strange conversation. Kirith, why are you really here? Not your fleet, not your mission. You, specifically, I go where I am commanded. That's not an answer. The alien warrior's flames flickered with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as agitation. You are persistent for prey. I'm not prey. I'm a father. What is the difference? Prey runs. Prey hides. Prey gives up. Fathers protect. Fathers stand firm. Fathers find solutions. Through the mental link, Marcus felt Kirith accessing memories he couldn't fully understand. Images flashed through the connection, vast cities of crystal and flame, beings of light dancing among the stars, ceremonies of binding and purpose that stretched back millennia. And underneath it all, a growing sense of emptiness that no amount of conquest seemed to fill. Your species has a saying, Kirith said suddenly. The child is father to the man. What does this mean? Marcus blinked in surprise. Where did you learn that? We study those we ... process, answer the question. It means that who we become as adults is shaped by who we were as children. That innocence and wonder and hope aren't weaknesses to be discarded, but foundations to be built upon. Sarah made another happy sound, still reaching toward the window. Kirith slowly raised her other hand, pressing both palms against the glass now. The barrier between them began to glow more brightly, but still held firm. Your offspring carries no fear. Kirith observed. She doesn't know she should be afraid. Perhaps she is wiser than her elders. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the settlement. Other Zephyrians were converging on their location, drawn perhaps by the strange energy signature Kirith was generating. Marcus could hear their mental communications as distant whispers at the edge of his consciousness. Filled with confusion and concern about their leader's behavior. "They come for you," Marcus said. "They come for orders. The processing awaits my command." "And what will you command?" Kirith stared at Sarah for a long moment, her burning eyes reflecting depths of thought that Marcus couldn't begin to fathom. When she finally spoke, her mental voice carried new harmonics, undertones of something that might have been hope. "That depends, human father, on whether you are willing to trust a creature of fire with something precious." The question hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. Marcus looked down at Sarah, who was still reaching toward Kirith with complete trust and wonder, then back at the alien warrior whose flame seemed to pulse with uncertainty. Around them, the sounds of destruction had ceased. An expectant silence filled the settlement as other Zephyrians awaited their leader's decision. "Trust is earned," Marcus said carefully, "not given blindly. Yet your offspring extends trust without reservation. She's 3 months old. She trusts everything. Perhaps that is wisdom your species loses too quickly." Through the mental link, Marcus could feel the approach of other Zephyrians. Their thoughts brushed against his consciousness like whispers in a foreign language, but the emotional undertones were clear enough: confusion, impatience, concern for their leaders, deviation from protocol. Kirith's flame suddenly flared brighter, and she turned away from the window to face her approaching subordinates. 3 other Zephyrians materialized from the smoky darkness, their forms slightly less radiant than their leaders but no less impressive. They moved with military precision, taking positions that would allow them to observe both Kirith and the humans in the shelter. The largest of the 3 stepped forward, his mental voice cutting through the air like a blade of ice despite the fire that comprised his form. "Flame-bearer, the processing awaits your command. The settlement has been cleared of resistance. Why do we delay?" Kirith didn't immediately respond. Instead, she pressed both hands more firmly against the barrier, and Marcus felt their mental connection deepen. For a brief moment, he experienced sensation through alien senses. The world exploded into a spectrum of energies he had no names for. He could taste the electromagnetic signatures of every electronic device in the settlement, feel the gravitational pull of the planet's core, see the quantum fluctuations that danced between atoms, but more than that, he could feel what Kirith felt when she looked at Sarah: wonder, a recognition of something pure and untainted that she had forgotten existed in the universe. And underneath that, a growing certainty that destroying this small perfect thing would damage something essential in herself. "Sub-Commander Vex," Kirith replied without turning around. "Implement Containment Protocol 7. Flame-bearer? That protocol is reserved for specimens of unique scientific value." "Exactly." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Kirith, what are you doing?" "Saving your life. All of your lives." The other Zephyrians exchanged glances that somehow conveyed volumes despite their alien features. Sub-Commander Vex stepped closer to his leader, his mental voice taking on undertones of challenge. "Flame-bearer, these humans show no unusual characteristics. They possess no advanced technology, no unique biological adaptations. By what criteria do they qualify for preservation?" Kirith finally turned to face her subordinates, and when she did, her flames blazed with an intensity that made the air shimmer like water. "By my criteria, Sub-Commander? Question me again, and you will be relieved of duty." The threat carried weight that Marcus could feel through their connection. Whatever authority Kirith wielded, it was absolute within her sphere of command. But he could also sense undercurrents of politics and hierarchy that she was choosing to ignore. This decision would have consequences. "As you command, Flame-bearer. Shall we establish a research facility?" "No, we will bring them with us." Now even Marcus couldn't hide his alarm. "Kirith, wait. What exactly are you suggesting?" She turned back to the window, her burning eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "Your species speaks of roads not taken, of choices that reshape destiny. I stand at such a crossroads now. And you want to drag my daughter into whatever choice you make? I want to save her from the consequences of the choice I don't make." Through their link, images flashed between them. Marcus saw fleet after fleet of Zephyrian ships sweeping across human space, leaving dead worlds in their wake. He saw the systematic cataloging and destruction of everything humanity had built among the stars. He saw Earth itself, distant and unaware, marked for eventual processing, but he also saw something else. In the deepest parts of Kirith's memory, he glimpsed moments of doubt, flashes of questions that she had pushed aside in favor of duty and obedience. The sight of Sarah reaching out without fear had somehow crystallized those doubts into something approaching rebellion. "You're planning something?" Marcus realized. "I am considering something." "There is a difference. What kind of something?" Kirith's flames dimmed slightly, and her mental voice took on tones of careful consideration. "Your species has survived longer than our projections indicated. This troubles the High Command. They seek to understand what they call the human variable. Before final processing begins? And you've just nominated us to be test subjects. I have nominated you to be something far more. Important teachers." Marcus felt Sarah shift in his arms, and he realized that the baby had been listening to their mental exchange with the peculiar attention that infants sometimes displayed. Her tiny hand was still reaching toward the window, but now she was making soft sounds that seemed almost like responses to the alien conversation. "Kirith," Marcus said slowly, "I think Sarah might be picking up more of this than we realize." The Zephyrian leader went completely still, her attention focusing on the baby with laser-like intensity. Through their connection, Marcus felt her extending some kind of sensory probe toward Sarah, a gentle mental touch that barely registered as a whisper of contact. The response was immediate and startling. Sarah laughed, the pure, joyful sound of an infant delighted by new sensory input. But the laugh carried harmonics that hadn't been there before, undertones that seemed to resonate in the same frequencies as Zephyrian communication. "Impossible," Sub-Commander Vex muttered. And Marcus could hear the awe in the alien's mental voice. "Not impossible," Kirith whispered. "Unprecedented." Marcus felt his protective instincts surge. "What's happening to her?" "Nothing harmful. Your offspring is ... Her neural pathways are forming connections that shouldn't be possible for her species." "Connections to what?" "To us, to our communication methods, to the harmonic frequencies that bind our thoughts together." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You're saying she's becoming telepathic?" "I'm saying she already was. She simply needed contact with telepathic beings to activate dormant potentials." Around them, the other Zephyrians moved closer, their forms radiating intense curiosity. Marcus could feel their attention like spotlights focused on his daughter, and his paternal instincts screamed warnings. But through his link with Kirith, he could also sense that their interest carried no malevolent intent. They were seeing something that challenged everything they thought they knew about human limitations. "This changes everything," Vex said, his mental voice filled with wonder. "Yes," Kirith agreed. "It does." She pressed her hands against the barrier once more, and this time the glass began to dissolve rather than merely glow. The molecular bonds simply unraveled, leaving an opening large enough for communication without the need for mental contact. "Human father," she said, her voice now audible in the air rather than just in his mind. "I offer you a choice that may doom us both. Come with us willingly, and your daughter may become the key to changing the fate of both our species. Refuse, and she will die here with the rest of your settlement when the processing resumes." Marcus looked down at Sarah, who was now making increasingly complex sounds that seemed to echo Kirith's harmonic patterns. His daughter was changing before his eyes, developing capabilities that would make her as alien to humanity as the Zephyrians themselves. "Some choice," he said bitterly. "The only choice that matters," Kirith replied. "Will you trust a creature of fire with the most precious thing in your universe?" Sarah reached toward the opening with both hands now, and her baby sounds took on new complexity, almost as if she were trying to answer the question herself.
Marcus stood on the threshold of a decision that would echo across the galaxy. Behind him, the remaining colonists watched with a mixture of terror and hope. Mrs. Chen had moved closer, her weathered hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture of support. Before him, Kirith waited with alien patience while her subordinates radiated barely contained eagerness to understand this unprecedented development. Sarah continued, making her harmonic sounds, each vocalization more complex than the last. It was as if she were learning an entirely new language in real time, her infant brain forming neural pathways that would forever separate her from baseline humanity. Marcus could see the changes beginning in her eyes, the way she focused on the Zephyrians with recognition rather than mere infant attention. "If I come with you," Marcus said carefully, "what happens to the others?" "Containment Protocol 7 preserves all specimens in the immediate area," Kirith replied. "They will be relocated to a research facility where their safety can be guaranteed." Research facility, not a prison? There is often little difference. Her honesty was brutal, but appreciated. Marcus could sense through their lingering mental connection that Kirith was struggling with concepts she had never needed to consider before. The difference between protection and imprisonment. The value of individual choice versus collective security. The meaning of family bonds that transcended mere genetic programming. And Sarah? What would happen to her? She would be studied, carefully, gently, but thoroughly. Her developing abilities could reshape our understanding of your species' potential. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "You're talking about experimenting on my daughter?" "I'm talking about understanding her gifts so that others might share them, the same thing." Flames flickered with what Marcus was learning to recognize as frustration. "Your language lacks the precision for this discussion. We do not experiment in the crude manner your species employs. We commune, we study, we learn together. Your offspring would be teacher as much as subject. She's 3 months old. She can't consent to any of this. Can she consent to death?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked around at the other survivors, all of them depending on his decision. Mrs. Chen gave him an encouraging nod, her eyes bright with unshed tears. A few others had gathered closer, forming a protective circle around him and Sarah. "Take us all or take none," Mrs. Chen said suddenly, her voice stronger than Marcus had heard it since the attack began. "The elderly female speaks wisdom," Sub-Commander Vex observed. "Separating the offspring from her social bonds could damage her development." Kirith turned to study the small group of humans. Her burning gaze seemed to catalog each individual, weighing their potential value against the complications they would represent. 17 additional specimens, she mused. The High Command expects efficiency, not sentiment. "Then convince them this is efficient," Marcus said. "You said Sarah's abilities could change how you understand humanity. Maybe she needs to stay connected to her humanity for those abilities to develop properly." Through their fading mental link, Marcus felt Kirith considering this argument. The alien leader was clearly improvising, operating far beyond the parameters of her original mission. But there was something driving her forward, some need that even she didn't fully understand. "Very well," Kirith decided. "All of you will come. But understand that this decision places my career and possibly my life at risk. I am trusting you not to make me regret this choice." "Now we're trusting you not to make us regret ours," Marcus replied. The evacuation happened with surprising efficiency. The Zephyrians provided environmental suits that adapted to human physiology, creating comfortable enclosed spaces filled with appropriately mixed atmosphere. Marcus found himself walking through the ruins of New Geneva, carrying Sarah. Surrounded by the other survivors and escorted by beings of living flame, the Zephyrian ship was a marvel of organic architecture, its corridors flowing like arteries through a body made of crystallized starlight. Everything curved and pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to the emotional states of those moving through the vessel. When Sarah laughed, the walls glowed brighter. When Mrs. Chen expressed wonder at their beauty, the patterns shifted to incorporate new colors. "Your ship is alive," Marcus observed as they were guided to what Kirith called their accommodation pod. "All our technology grows rather than being built," Kirith confirmed. "We cultivate our tools rather than manufacturing them. And this one responds to emotions. All life responds to emotions. Your species simply lacks the sensitivity to perceive those responses. Their quarters turned out to be a cluster of connected chambers that somehow felt both spacious and intimate. The walls provided whatever amenities the occupants needed, seemingly anticipating desires before they were consciously formed. Sarah's section configured itself into a perfect nursery environment, complete with soft surfaces and gentle lighting that cycled in rhythm with infant sleep patterns. But it was the view that truly took Marcus's breath away. Through transparent sections of the hull, he could see the Zephyrian fleet spreading out across space like a constellation of artificial stars. Hundreds of ships, each one unique in design but sharing the same organic aesthetic, moved in formation toward destinations unknown. "Where are you taking us?" Marcus asked as Sarah settled into sleep in his arms. "To the Nexus," Kirith replied, "the heart of our empire, where the High Command makes decisions that shape the fate of entire species." "And you think bringing a human baby there is a good idea?" "I think bringing hope there is essential." Marcus felt the weight of that statement. Through their occasional mental touches, he had glimpsed the structure of Zephyrian society. It was ancient, efficient, and utterly without room for individual choice or deviation from established patterns. Kirith was taking them into a civilization that had forgotten how to question its own purposes. "You're not just risking your career," Marcus realized. "You're planning a revolution." "I am planning nothing. I am simply allowing possibilities to exist." "Same thing." Sarah stirred in his sleep, making soft harmonics that resonated through the ship's living walls. The patterns of light around them shifted in response, creating new configurations that seemed almost musical. Other passengers, the rescued colonists, began to emerge from their chambers, drawn by the unusual display. "Look at that," whispered Jennifer, the teenager who had been placed in Marcus's care during the evacuation. "It's like the ship is singing with her." And it was. The bioluminescent patterns were forming complex harmonies that matched and complemented Sarah's unconscious vocalizations. The ship itself was learning from a 3-month-old human baby, incorporating her developing telepathic abilities into its own sensory matrix. Mrs. Chen approached carefully, her eyes wide with wonder. "Marcus, I think we need to understand something important here." "What's that?" "This isn't about Sarah becoming more like them," she said, gesturing toward the dancing lights. "It's about them becoming more like us." Kirith, who had been observing from the chamber's entrance, stepped forward with what Marcus had learned to recognize as surprise. "The elderly female shows unexpected insight," she admitted. "What do you perceive?" Mrs. Chen pointed to the patterns flowing across the walls. "These lights used to move in rigid formations, didn't they? Predictable cycles that never varied?" "Yes. And now?" Kirith studied the chaotic beauty surrounding them, patterns that incorporated elements of human emotion and infant wonder into previously static designs. "Now they improvise," she said quietly. "Exactly. Sarah isn't just learning to communicate with you. She's teaching your ship to feel." The implications of that statement rippled through the chamber like physical waves. If one human baby could influence a Zephyrian vessel in a matter of hours, what might happen when they reached the Nexus? What kind of changes might 17 humans bring to a civilization that had been static for millennia? Marcus looked down at his sleeping daughter, then up at Kirith's burning eyes. "You have no idea what you've started, do you?" "No," Kirith admitted, "and neither do you." The moment of contact between Sarah and the core consciousness changed everything. Not gradually, not subtly, but with the sudden completeness of sunrise breaking across a world that had forgotten what daylight looked like. The ancient structure, pulsed with new colors, patterns of light that had never existed before, flowing across its crystalline surface in response to the innocent wonder of a human infant. Marcus felt the change through every nerve in his body. The Nexus itself was awakening from a sleep that had lasted geological ages, its vast intelligence stirring to acknowledge the presence of something it had never encountered. Pure potential, unbound by preconception or purpose. "She speaks the language of beginning," the core consciousness said, its voice now resonating through both air and thought. I had forgotten such words existed. High Counselor Zix and her assembly stood frozen in positions of shock and growing alarm. Through their partially shared mental network, Marcus could sense their distress as fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality began to crumble around them. Core consciousness, Zix said carefully. The human specimens require careful study before any significant interaction should occur. Study? The ancient intelligence's amusement was like the sound of distant stars laughing. Child of my children, I have studied your preserved specimens for thousands of years. Perfect, static, eternal, and absolutely lifeless. This small being offers something I thought lost forever. What does she offer? Marcus asked, still holding Sarah close as she continued her impossible conversation with the most powerful intelligence in the galaxy. Questions, the core consciousness replied. When did my children stop asking questions? The assembled Zephyrians exchanged glances that somehow conveyed volumes of discomfort. Through his developing sensitivity to their emotional states, Marcus began to understand that questioning was not simply discouraged in their society, it was fundamentally alien to their nature. Questions lead to chaos, Subcommander Vex said, his mental voice tight with generations of conditioning. Questions lead to deviation from optimal patterns. Sarah made a sound that was unmistakably laughter, her harmonic patterns carrying overtones of gentle disagreement. The core consciousness responded with patterns of its own, and suddenly the entire chamber was filled with something that could only be described as conversation, not between adult and infant, but between ancient wisdom and infinite possibility. She suggests, the core consciousness translated, that chaos is merely order that we have not yet learned to perceive. The infant cannot possibly understand such concepts. High Counselor Zix protested. Cannot or should not? Marcus challenged. Because there's a difference. Through his connection with Kirith, Marcus felt her own growing amazement. The alien warrior had expected to present an interesting anomaly to her superiors. Instead, she had brought a catalyst for changes that would echo across their entire civilization. Flamebearer, Zix said sharply. What have you done? I have brought you exactly what you requested, Kirith replied with careful precision. Specimens of unique scientific value for study and evaluation. You have brought revolution disguised as research. I have brought a baby who asks better questions than our entire council. Sarah chose that moment to reach toward High Counselor Zix herself, making soft cooing sounds that somehow carried deep harmonic complexities. The ancient Zephyrian leader found herself involuntarily extending one burning hand toward the infant. Drawn by an innocence she had forgotten could exist, the moment their energies touched, Zix's entire form flickered like a candle in the wind. Through the connection, Sarah shared something that no Zephyrian had experienced in millennia. The sensation of learning something entirely new, not recalling. Archived data or following predetermined patterns, but genuinely discovering fresh understanding. She shows me memories, Zix whispered in amazement. Memories of growth, of change, of becoming something more than what was before. Human memories? Marcus asked. Her own memories. Of the first time she saw light, of the first time she recognized your voice, the first time she felt safe in your arms. Zix's flames grew brighter, pulsing with new patterns. These are experiences we have forgotten how to have. The core consciousness began to shift. Its crystalline structure reconfiguring itself in response to the conversation flowing around Sarah. Ancient systems that had lain dormant for eons began to activate, reaching out through the Nexus's neural networks to touch every corner of Zephyrian space. I am remembering, the vast intelligence said, its voice filling with something that might have been wonder. I am remembering why I chose to create life, instead of simply cataloging it. Throughout the chamber, the assembled Zephyrians were beginning to change. Their rigid formations softened into more natural groupings. Their mental communications, previously formal and protocol-driven, began to carry undertones of curiosity and speculation. They were learning to question, and the process was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Mrs. Chen, who had remained quietly observant throughout the exchange, stepped forward with the kind of courage that came from having lived long enough to understand what really mattered. Excuse me, she said politely, her voice somehow carrying clearly through the vast space. But I think you're all missing the most important point here. Every burning eye in the chamber focused on the elderly human woman. She smiled with the confidence of someone who had raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. Sarah isn't just teaching you to ask questions, she continued. She's showing you that the answers don't matter nearly as much as the asking. You've spent thousands of years collecting perfect solutions too. It's problems that stop being relevant the moment you solve them. Explain, High Counselor Zix requested, her mental voice carrying genuine curiosity for the first time in centuries. You preserve species by freezing them at their moment of perfection. But perfection is death. Growth is life. Sarah is 3 months old, which means she's perfect at being 3 months old. In 3 more months, she'll be perfect at being 6 months old, which will be completely different from what she is now. The implications of that statement rippled through the assembled consciousness like waves through still water. For beings who had spent millennia pursuing the static perfection of preserved specimens, the concept of dynamic perfection was revolutionary. You suggest that our preservation methods are flawed, the core consciousness observed. I suggest that your preservation methods preserve everything except the thing that makes life worth preserving, Mrs. Chen replied. The capacity for change. Sarah made another complex series of sounds, her infant voice somehow conveying agreement and elaboration on concepts she shouldn't have been able to understand. The core consciousness responded immediately, its crystalline structure beginning to pulse with patterns that seemed almost organic in their irregularity. She proposes collaboration rather than preservation, it translated. Growth through interaction rather than isolation. She suggests. The ancient intelligence paused, as if struggling with concepts too foreign to easily process. She suggests. That we might learn from the species we encounter, rather than simply cataloging them? Revolutionary, Kirith breathed, her mental voice filled with awe and terror in equal measure. Impossible, Sub-Commander, Vex protested, though his convictions seemed to be wavering. Necessary, said Mrs. Chen firmly. Marcus looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of a galactic empire, all of them struggling to process ideas introduced by his 3-month-old daughter. The absurdity of the situation would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so enormous. So what happens now, he asked. Now the core consciousness replied, we begin the most dangerous experiment in our history. We attempt to learn how to grow again. High Counselor Zix moved closer to Sarah, her burning form radiating something that might have been hope mixed with fear. Small speaker, will you teach us? Sarah looked up at the ancient alien leader and smiled, reaching out with both hands. In the universal gesture of an infant wanting to be held. When Zix carefully extended her energy field to make contact, the baby laughed with pure delight, her harmonic patterns spreading through the nexus like ripples of joy. She says yes, Kirith translated unnecessarily. But she also says that teaching and learning are the same thing, and that the best students are the ones who remember how to play. Marcus watched his daughter begin to reshape the oldest civilization in the galaxy through the simple act of being herself. He thought about roads not taken, about choices that reshape destiny, about the moment when a creature of fire had chosen to trust him with something precious. Now, perhaps it was time to trust her with something precious in return. The future spread out before them like an unwritten book, its pages blank with infinite possibility. And for the first time in thousands of years, the Zephyrians were eager to see what story would be written there. The journey to the Nexus took 18 standard days, and during that time, Sarah Chin became the most studied baby in galactic history. Not through invasive procedures or clinical examination, but through simple observation and interaction. The Zephyrians found themselves drawn to her, like moths to a gentle flame. Their ancient minds struggling to process the concept of pure, its potential unshaded by predetermined purpose. Marcus watched his daughter change with each passing day. Her vocalizations now carried complex, harmonic structures that the ship's living walls reproduced and amplified throughout the vessel. She had learned to project simple emotional states through telepathic contact, filling the surrounding space with contentment when she was happy or gentle distress when she needed attention. The effect on the Zephyrian crew was profound and disturbing. They're not prepared for this, Mrs. Chen observed on the morning of the 15th day. She stood beside Marcus at the observation window. watching Sub-Commander Vex attempt to understand why Sarah laughed when he made certain gestures. The powerful alien warrior was reduced to playing peekaboo, his burning features arranged in what might have been confusion. "None of us are," Marcus replied, including Sarah herself. Through the transparent hull, they could see their destination growing larger. The Nexus was less a planet than a constructed reality. A massive sphere covered in crystalline structures that pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns they had seen aboard the ship. It was beautiful in an alien way, but also somehow sterile, like a perfect work of art that had never been touched by living hands. Flamebearer, one of the crew members, called through the ship's communication network. "We are receiving priority signals from the High Command. They request immediate debriefing upon arrival." Kirith's mental voice reached Marcus across the distance between their chambers. "They know something has changed. Word of our unusual cargo has preceded us? Is that good or bad? Unknown. The High Command does not often concern itself with individual specimens." Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. They were approaching a civilization that had existed for thousands of years without significant change, carrying with them a baby who had already begun altering the fundamental nature of everything she encountered. The potential for disaster was enormous. Sarah chose that moment to wake from her nap, opening eyes that now held flecks of golden light that definitely hadn't been there at birth. She looked around the chamber with alert intelligence, her gaze focusing on things that weren't visible to purely human perception. When she saw Marcus, she smiled and reached toward him with hands that left brief trails of luminescence in the air. She said clearly, her first recognizable word, carrying harmonic undertones that made the walls around them glow brighter. Marcus felt his heart stop. Did she just... "Your offspring has achieved vocal milestone 3 months ahead of typical human development," Kirith observed, having appeared in their chamber without making a sound. "The telepathic enhancement appears to accelerate cognitive growth." "Enhancement? I thought you said she was always telepathic." "Latent potential, now fully actualized. The difference is significant." Sarah turned toward Kirith and made a complex series of sounds that seemed almost like greeting. The alien leader responded instinctively, her own harmonic patterns flowing in what was clearly becoming a conversation between infant and alien warrior. "What are they saying?" Marcus asked. "She expresses curiosity about the approaching structure. She perceives it as home button home, which is remarkably accurate for the Nexus. I am attempting to explain the concept of artificial habitat construction. A 3-month-old baby to a rapidly developing telepathic intellect housed in a 3-month-old body. The distinction matters." The docking process was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. Rather than mechanical connections, the ship seemed to merge partially with the Nexus's surface, creating a seamless transition between vessel and station. The artificial gravity adjusted automatically. The atmospheric composition shifted to accommodate both human and Zephyrian needs. Delegation was waiting for them in the docking chamber. Marcus had seen impressive aliens before, but these beings radiated authority that was almost tangible. Their flames burned with deeper, more complex colors, and their mental presence felt like standing before vast mountains of living thought. The central figure stepped forward, her form more elaborate and decorated than any Zephyrian Marcus had yet encountered. When she spoke, her mental voice carried harmonics of absolute command. "Flamebearer Kirith, you have deviated significantly from established protocols. Explain your actions." "High Counselor Zix, I present specimens of unique scientific value for study and evaluation." 17 humans. "One transport vessel could have brought thousands. Quality over quantity, High Counselor. These specimens display unprecedented adaptability." Kirith gestured toward Sarah, who was looking around the chamber with bright curiosity. The baby seemed completely unintimidated by the imposing aliens surrounding them, instead appearing fascinated by the new patterns of light and energy. "The young one shows telepathic potential?" High Counselor Zix inquired. "The young one shows telepathic reality," Kirith corrected. "Observe." Sarah looked directly at the High Counselor and made a series of harmonic sounds that were clearly intended as communication. The effect was immediate and startling. Every Zephyrian in the chamber went completely still, their flames dimming to barely visible levels. "Impossible," whispered one of the council members. "She greets us in the ancient tongue." "How does she know the ceremonial forms?" Marcus felt his protective instincts surge. "What ceremonial forms? What's she saying?" High Counselor Zix moved closer, her burning eyes studying Sarah with an intensity that made Marcus want to step between them. "She speaks the formal greeting used between equals in matters of great importance. No one has used those words in over 2,000 years. Maybe she's just mimicking sounds she heard from Kirith. The ceremonial greeting requires understanding of 17 different harmonic layers, each carrying specific meaning. Your offspring is not mimicking. She is communicating with full comprehension." Sarah laughed again, the sound carrying new complexities that resonated through the chamber's crystalline walls. The patterns of light that responded to her emotions began spreading beyond their immediate vicinity, flowing through the Nexus's neural networks like ripples across a vast pond. "High Counselor," another council member said urgently, "the central consciousness is responding to the human infant's emissions. Should we implement isolation protocols?" No. The response came not from High Counselor Zix, but from an ancient voice that seemed to speak from the walls themselves. "Bring the small speaker to me. It has been too long since new words were spoken in these halls." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Who was that?" "The Nexus itself," Kirith replied, her mental voice filled with awe. "The original consciousness that built this place. It has been dormant for centuries, and Sarah woke it up. Sarah reminded it that communication requires more than one participant." The journey deeper into the Nexus was a progression through increasingly fantastic spaces. Chambers flowed into chambers, each one adapted to different purposes and different forms of life. They passed through areas designed for beings of pure energy, others meant for creatures that existed partially outside normal space-time. The diversity was staggering, and Marcus began to understand that the Zephorians were not conquerors, but collectors. "You preserve other species," he realized. "We preserve everything," High Counselor Zix confirmed. "When a species reaches the end of its natural development cycle, we ensure its essence survives in the eternal archive. By destroying their worlds and imprisoning the survivors, by preventing the chaos of unchecked growth from destroying what should be preserved." Sarah made a sound that somehow conveyed disagreement, her harmonic patterns carrying undertones of what could only be described as gentle correction. The effect on the assembled Zephyrians was profound. Several of them stopped walking entirely, their forms flickering as they processed concepts they had never been forced to consider. "The small speaker suggests an alternative perspective," the ancient voice of the Nexus observed. "She proposes that preservation without growth is merely elaborate death." "Possible," High Counselor Zix said, but her mental voice lacked conviction. "The small one cannot understand such complex philosophical concepts. Can't she?" Marcus asked. "Or are you just uncomfortable with the possibility that a 3-month-old baby might see something you've missed for the past few thousand years?" They entered the central chamber, vast space that seemed to exist partially in normal dimensions and partially in realms of pure thought. At its heart hung a structure that defied description, something that was simultaneously crystalline and organic, mathematical and emotional, ancient beyond measure yet somehow eternally young. "The core consciousness," Kirith whispered, "the source of all Zephyrian knowledge and purpose." Sarah reached toward the impossible structure with both hands, making sounds of pure wonder and joy. And for the first time in millennia, the core consciousness reached back.